Welcome to the CryptoCounsel at Wiley, where we decode the most important issues in crypto litigation and regulation. I'm Frank, a finance and technology litigator who focuses on crypto disputes.
I'm Lauren, a regulatory lawyer who focuses on emerging technologies, including cryptocurrency regulation and enforcement.
And I'm Isaac, a white-collar and litigation attorney that focuses on government-adjacent litigation and also focuses on crypto law.
Welcome to the podcast, guys. So this is essentially CryptoCounsel 2.0, and now there's three of us, which I finally have my dream, as I have told Josh in the past before he went to the government. I had always wanted a council of CryptoCounsel, a CryptoCounsel council, and I now have it in you two fine colleagues at Wiley. So before we get too far into what we're going to talk about today and how we're going to talk about it, I'd love for you guys to introduce yourselves. Obviously, I know you and work with you closely and know what you're all about, but our listeners are just meeting you for the first time. And so it'd be great to just hear why it is that you are on the podcast, what your practices are all about, and your experience with crypto law. And Lauren, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Lauren Lerman, and I advise telecommunications and emerging technology clients. So these include clients in the AI and FinTech space, and I advise them on a variety of regulatory and compliance matters, including existing laws and rules at both state and federal levels around maybe consumer protection or cybersecurity. And I also help these types of clients with developing laws and rules in the tech space and help them navigate how their internal governance procedures can help them set their companies up for success. And with these clients, I also represent them before federal agencies such as the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission, and at the state level before state attorneys general in the enforcement actions and investigations. And I got into the crypto and fintech space back in 2017, actually, when I worked at the Arizona Attorney General's office. And while there, I helped develop and run the first fintech sandbox in the US, which gave me a great chance to meet and get to know a lot of different fintech and crypto companies. And it made me really interested in sitting on the other side of the table to help them navigate these complex laws, the existing ones, as well as the ones that are emerging and developing. And so that's kind of what got me into the space. And it's now a really exciting time to be involved. There's a lot of new developments.
Yeah, 2017, I mean, you're like OG crypto, essentially. That puts you in the early history periods of crypto. So you definitely see it from a perspective that I think a lot of folks, certainly I had not been following it that early. So I'm super, super excited about your perspective, Lauren. Isaac, what say you? What's going on in your world, your practice, your interest and experience with crypto law?
Thanks, Frank. And for the audience, I'm Isaac Wyant, a white-collar and litigation attorney here at Wiley. So generally representing companies and individuals who get in trouble or are involved in investigations by the U.S. government, but also challenging different government regulations where, in government-adjacent litigation. And with that, some of my work has intersected with crypto as crypto has been on the rise, and being very interested in the technology has really gotten me interested in crypto. And I see this as, something that's only going to be emerging further in the future.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Josh, my former partner in pod on the CryptoCounsel, and I were big fans of meme coins. And Josh was especially fond of Dogecoin. He never told me how heavily invested he was in Dogecoin, but I have to assume since he's now back in the government that he made some sort of killing on the whole thing. I'm curious to know, do you guys have a favorite meme coin?
Isaac, do you have one?
I don't.
I feel like for me, if I have to pick one, it's probably Moodang, because I just think I think the intersection between pop culture and this area is just something that's very fascinating.
So this is the hippopotamus coin, I believe, is Moodang.
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Okay, a very fine animal to be associated with a cryptocurrency. Excellent. Isaac, there's still time for you to develop a love of meme coin.
Josh stole mine with Dogecoin. I had invested a little bit of money in Doge at one point before getting too nervous and taking that money out. But yeah, I think Josh beat me to that one.
I think my recollection is that Josh's main interest in Dogecoin was Elon's promise to put a literal Dogecoin on a SpaceX rocket ship to the moon, which I think we're all still waiting for. But Josh was particularly fascinated by that application of the Dogecoin. Very well. So in the spirit of this new crypto council that we have assembled, listeners are going to be hearing from one or two or all three of us from time to time, along with guests that we're going to continue to bring on and share perspectives. So sometimes it might be me and Lauren, or me and Isaac, or Lauren and Isaac, or all three of us, but you're going to continue to get the same podcast experience just with a broader set of perspectives and voices here at the firm. So I think that's super exciting. And in that spirit, one thing that we wanted to talk about today as sort of Crypto Counsel 2.0 was all the things that are happening in Crypto 2.0 with the new administration and the changes that are coming so fast and so furious and with such unbelievable force. Things are just very different than where we found ourselves less than essentially 2 months ago before the new administration took over. So I'm just going to quickly sort of in one place, because I don't think we haven't done this on the podcast, in any of our publications or conversations with folks, just go through from day one of the Trump administration. I think we're on day 67 now, not even 100 days in, which is often sort of a critical marker for how fast things are moving. All the things that have happened in crypto on account of the new administration and how much change has occurred. So the new administration takes power on January 20th. That's inauguration day. That's day one. 1 day later, day two, January 21st, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, launches its crypto task force, which is led by Commissioner Hester Peirce, former guest on this podcast, the day after the election, in fact. And this task force is dedicated to developing a comprehensive and clear regulatory framework for crypto assets. So that is a huge development right out of the gate, day two. Day four, just a couple of days later, on January 23rd, President Trump signs an executive order titled Strengthening American Leadership in Digital Financial Technology. This executive order establishes a working group on digital asset markets chaired by the president's special advisor for AI and crypto, that's David Sachs. And it's made up of officials from a bunch of executive agencies that would touch the crypto world. And the executive order tasks the working group with a bunch of stuff and basically wants a comprehensive report to the president within 180 days, so that's this summer, recommending regulatory and legislative proposals that advance the policies in the executive order. Those policies include providing clearer, more definite technology-neutral regulations, protecting and promoting software developers and deployers, miners, and other infrastructure providers. And those policies seek to grow the industry's crucial role in innovation and economic development. That same day four, just 4 days in, the SEC rescinds Staff Accounting Bulletin, SAB 121, which had imposed controversial accounting and financial reporting requirements for entities that safeguard crypto assets. So one, tons of change. Just a few weeks later, on day 16, February 4th, President Trump's crypto czar, David Sachs, holds a press conference on Capitol Hill, along with members of Congress, to discuss the new plans for cryptocurrency legislation and regulation. He was joined by Senate Banking Committee Chairman Tim Scott, Senate Agriculture Committee Chairman John Boozman, House Agriculture Committee Chairman Glenn G.T. Thompson, and House Financial Services Committee Chairman French Hill. And they discuss in pretty robust detail plans to push market structure and stablecoin legislation through the Congress in the first 100 days of the new administration. And we'll talk about more that's happened on that since then. Day 32, February 20th, the SEC announces the creation of the Cyber and Emerging Technologies Unit, the CETU. I have no idea if that's meant to be said in a particular way, but it's essentially meant to focus on combating cyber-related misconduct and to protect retail investors from bad actors in the emerging technology space. And this new division, the CETU, replaces the Crypto Assets and Cyber Unit. It's comprised of approximately 30 fraud specialists and attorneys across multiple different SEC offices, not just the enforcement division. Day 33, the next day on February 21st, the SEC Crypto Task Force solicits input on the commission's approach to crypto in a quite lengthy, detailed statement from Commissioner Peirce that asks some of the critical questions that they want answered and some of the priorities that they're seeking to address. That same day, the SEC drops its case against Coinbase, a case that we all have been following incredibly closely and have been very hotly litigated. In fact, our firm had filed an amicus brief on behalf of some trade associations in support of Coinbase in that case. And the SEC separately closed an investigation into Robinhood that it had opened in the prior administration. Day 43, March 3rd, the SEC drops another milestone case against Kraken. Day 47, May 7th, President signs another executive order, and this one establishes a strategic Bitcoin reserve and U.S. digital asset stockpile, which many people have been speculating would happen, but he made it official less than 50 days into its new administration that this was going to be a thing that was committing to and putting into place. And then later that day, and even as significant, the president held a digital asset summit at the White House, first of its kind. Cabinet members, industry leaders sat down with the president, with the crypto czar, to discuss various ways in which the U.S. can regain leadership over the digital asset industry, including through comprehensive legislation. So a big day, just less than 50 days into the new administration. A few days later, on day 54, which is March 17th, the SEC revokes the authority of the enforcement director to issue investigative demands without full commission approval. So the idea that you could have the enforcement division of the SEC going after crypto companies without the commissioners of the Securities and Exchange signing off on it, no longer possible. Day 59, March 19th, the SEC drops its case against Ripple Labs. Ripple Labs is obviously the XRP token issuer, and this was one of the longest running litigations over whether crypto and crypto assets could qualify as a security. That case is put to bed less than 60 days in. Day 61, March 21st, the SEC Crypto Task Force convenes its first of 5 roundtable discussions as part of its spring sprint towards crypto. And the topic there was how to classify digital assets under U.S. securities law. There was a very spirited conversation around the Howey test that ensued, and we touched on a lot of those issues in some of our last year's episodes of the podcast. And these folks grappled with that with the SEC commissioners to try to figure out a path forward there, which brings us to today, March 27th, day 67. So not even 70 days in. And we have going on as we speak, Paul Atkins's confirmation hearings to lead the SEC down on Capitol Hill. So not even 70 days in, a ton has happened. And that's just hitting the highlights. There's things that we haven't even touched on that have occurred, but this administration, this Congress, this Securities and Exchange Commission, other stakeholders and agencies in the federal government are committed to a new approach to crypto, and we're seeing day after day, less than 100 days into the new administration. So that's a lot. I just did a lot of talking, but just wanted to put that all out there. I mean, this is basically what people were speculating was possible under a new Trump administration. But now it's not just possible, it's reality. We're all living it, experiencing it, seeing what it means. And I know, Lauren, yesterday you actually had the opportunity to attend a industry conference, the Digital Chamber DC Blockchain Summit here in DC. And I'm just interested sort of what the big takeaways there was. A lot of this conversation, these events being talked about, what the buzz was, anything you'd love to report on. And first, I'm just sort of interested in what was the vibe there? The scale from, let's say, basically stuck in an elevator with Gary Gensler to Snoop Dogg at the crypto ball. What was the energy at this conference?
Yeah, it is a really great time for the Blockchain Summit this year. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of excitement. Definitely up there with Snoop Dogg at the Crypto Ball. It was really exciting. And the turnout this year is actually double, if not more than double, what it was the last year. And so I think that's really representative. People are excited about what's to come. They're excited about the possibilities within this industry. And that buzz was very much there. Probably that and the limitless free coffee at the espresso bar, but definitely a lot of people, both in the sessions, some of the sessions were maxed out. You couldn't even get in the door. There were so many people in there. And then there was also just a lot of people talking, excited about their products, their businesses, and what they are hoping to be able to do with all of these changes that you just discussed. The summit had a lot of big names. So the SEC Commissioner, Hester Peirce, that you mentioned, who's been a guest on here before, she was there and gave a keynote. The new Binance CEO was there, Richard Tang. There were numerous senators, representatives on both sides of the aisle. There were state regulators and governors. There was even the White House's executive director of the Presidential Council of Advisors for Digital Assets, Hines, and the Counselor to Treasury Secretary on Digital Assets, Tyler Williams. They were both there and kind of talking about the White House's approach to digital assets. So a lot of interesting discussions and a lot of focus on what regulators and legislators are trying to do to kind of move this industry forward, open doors, remove the burdens that the industry has seen in past years. And I think all of the speakers were really positive about the future of digital assets in the US and kind of creating a framework to help crypto and other digital asset companies have clear direction when it comes to what rules, laws, and governing bodies apply or would have authority over their operations. So I think some themes from the event that I took away would just be generally pushing for flexible rules and laws that allow these companies to grow, change, and innovate, bring these companies back to the US. A lot of the regulators expressed also a desire to talk with industry more and emphasize the fact that they have open doors. They want to hear from people. They want to hear about how potential regulations or existing regulations really impact crypto companies and their operations. And I think the notable difference here from, sometimes what happens in the past is these regulators, they're developing new rules and new policies. And so they're genuinely interested in what is going to help and benefit companies. It's not a trap. And so I think that's something that companies should take to heart and really, go talk to the regulators because they are interested and hungry to know how they can help. Another theme that I kind of noticed that was of particular interest to me was actually around this idea of regulatory sandboxes, maybe exploring that at more of the federal level. So the acting comptroller of the currency was talking about doing it at the OCC. The Hester Peirce was talking about doing it at the SEC. Lots of acronyms. But, I think that's something that's kind of being explored just because in this space, there are so many unique products and services that are being offered that don't really fit nice and neatly into existing regulatory buckets. And so I think along those lines, there was just a general acknowledgement that Congress really is going to play a critical role in kind of paving the way for any sort of frameworks because they're going to set the stage for who's doing what, which regulators doing what, kind of put the guardrails up for regulators saying this is what you can do, what you can regulate. So Congress, I think, is definitely going to play a big role here. Another theme I saw was a push for open banking. I think that's something that crypto and fintech companies have talked a lot about in the past, but the pressure that the banks had to not really engage with this industry has been really harmful as they have been trying to grow and develop. So I think that's a mindset shift that I noticed throughout the day. And then from the state regulators, there was also this consensus that even though the federal frameworks might be changing, there might be new federal laws, there's still a lot of existing state regulatory frameworks, specifically focused on digital assets. And there's also governing bodies that are focused on this. And so the state regulators were saying, don't forget about us. You should, one, be aware that we exist and also engage with us too. We also want to help and we are also really invested in this space. So I think overall, it was really a fascinating event. It was wonderful to see so much excitement and meet so many great people that are really excited about what's next. One other little thing I will just share from Hester Peirce's keynote, which I thought was really excellent. And she's someone, obviously, who's very pro digital assets and has been talking about this and fighting for crypto for a while. One of her things was she kind of made a call to Congress saying that in the laws that they're creating, there needs to be clear delineations of authority between the various agencies that interact in this space to help mitigate burdens on companies created by overlapping rules that happen when multiple agencies have jurisdiction. So I thought that was a really good point and something that was really clear on her side and something that maybe you don't always hear from the regulators who they're like, well, we just want to do all of it, actually. We don't care what anyone else is doing. So I think, again, just kind of goes to the mindset of overall, everyone's really excited and wants to support the industry.
That's just an incredible report. That's like a really awesome day. I mean, the fact that all those folks were there in one room is remarkable in and of itself. I remember I was reading the transcript of the Digital Asset Summit that occurred on March 7th at the White House, and it was one of the Winklevoss brothers, and I forget which one, and part of the joke was which one was speaking at any given time. But one of them said that it was amazing, and he was, I think, speaking directly to the president, basically saying that this time last year, they would have thought they would have been in prison for being involved in crypto. And now 1 year later, they're at the White House and like getting red carpet treatment. And some of the vibe of the guest list and the commitment and all the stakeholders from government and the industry being there and having an uplifting conversation where no one was under threat of going to prison, I think is a nice and interesting twist on where we were a year ago. I'm curious whether it was Commissioner Peirce or anyone else, was there sort of a sense of we have to wait to see what the legislation from Congress is before we can tailor a regulatory rule or approach at the SEC level or any other agency level? Or are they trying to sort of do it in parallel and guess at where the Congress is going, or at least design it in such a way that it will accommodate wherever that lands? Like, was there any sequencing that people kind of touched on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it was necessarily sequencing as much as focusing on what is within their clear authority. So one of the things that Commissioner Peirce mentioned was the fact that there are a subset of crypto offerings that actually do fall within securities. Not all of them, not most of them, but a subset of them. And so for those, creating a clear framework and a clear path to be able to register as a security, to be able to comply with the rules, because, I think that even if that's something that someone was like, yeah, maybe I am a security, but I actually literally cannot register based on the requirements. So I think the focus right now of agencies is what is already very clearly within their authority. And then I think it goes back to the open door policy as well, really collecting information about what is most helpful, what these companies need to have a little bit more regulatory clarity. And I think hopefully everything will kind of happen quickly in Congress to then allow the agencies, once they're kind of getting to the next steps and able and ready to maybe provide some additional guidance for different types of digital assets, that will already be set out for them. I don't think it was a clear talk of this has to happen first. I think there's still so much to do on just the information collection side that agencies are not quite at the point where they're like, okay, Congress, we're waiting on you. We'll do anything, but we're waiting on you. So yeah, there's a lot to be done still, I think, but there's willingness, which is a huge step in the right direction.
And then another thing I'm curious about, if Commissioner Peirce has in the past, under the old administration, talked about a solution that she favored, which was her token safe harbor approach. And I think she's on 2.0 now, although it's rumored that she might be going to 3.0. Was that part of the conversation, or do we seem to have moved on to something potentially new and different altogether? Because for many years, people sort of speculated that if we had a safe and soft landing, that proposal was the most likely path, although there's some different forks in the road that you could take it. And I'm interested if that was sort of a topic of conversation.
Yeah, so I think she didn't specifically talk about the safe harbor, but she talked about things that are often considered in adjacent with safe harbors, one being a regulatory sandbox. She said that's something that she saw as something that'd be really beneficial for the SEC to have. And, regulatory sandboxes, part of what they do is they provide this regulatory relief with other sort of safeguards put in place, but it's significantly less burdensome than standard regulations. And so I think that is kind of a step in a similar direction. And then she also discussed no action letters, which is something that they issue at the SEC, and some other agencies do that as well, where you can request a no action letter, which basically an agency can issue and say, we agree not to take action against you for X, Y, and Z. And so that similarly provides in a different way a certain type of safe harbor. But of course, no action letters are not necessarily binding, and they are not something that necessarily would need to exist through multiple administrations. So I think there's still a lot that can be advocated for in the safe harbor area.
Awesome. And I'm a litigator. Isaac is a litigator. Lauren, I know sometimes you touch litigation, although you are more of a regulatory advisor and problem solver. One thing that I've certainly been interested in is, now that the SEC has backed off aggressively pursuing industry participants, what do the litigation risks look like for crypto companies? What are people worried about? What are they forecasting? Was there any conversation in the conference about what that looks like, or were people really keeping it on the, yay, we're in a safe space, it's time to innovate, let's just not worry about that for right now? Because at some point, there's obviously going to be litigation one way or another around these companies, but everyone's sort of scratching their head wondering, okay, you won with the SEC, but what's next?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different angles here. One, people are much more optimistic that now that the SEC is not focused on them. And I think a good thing, and this was noted by Hester Peirce and by some other regulators, a good thing to note is these agencies will still go after bad actors, people who are fraudulent in these industries. So setting that aside, assuming you're acting in good faith and you are not trying to defraud consumers, I think that there's a much less of a litigation risk. However, the state regulators still have a lot of authority, and that's not something that not every state has this same perspective. And in New York, they have New York Department of Financial Services. And so that department is going to be looking into this space. Some states do see this as an area now that maybe needs some enforcement now that the SEC has backed off. So I think there was a little bit of a mention of that here and there by some of the states saying, hey, we are still here. We do still have authority to kind of investigate certain things. But again, most people were very positive. So I don't think it's to the same degree as it was with the prior administration at the SEC, but there's never zero risk, right?
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a really cool day. I'm jealous you were there, and super cool to get a report on what went down and where things seem to be heading. You mentioned bad actors and the fact that those folks are still going to be in the crosshairs. Obviously, bad actors tend to need white-collar lawyers. Isaac, you're a white-collar lawyer. What are you seeing, and what's bubbling up, and what kinds of things do you predict is coming down the pike for folks, even in a world where the SEC is maybe not going to do all the things it was doing last year, but there's still other potential risks out there maybe lurking beneath the surface?
Yeah, I think this is sort of the million-dollar question, right, Frank? Sort of peering into the crystal ball here. Stepping back, white-collar lawyers are asking the question of the Trump administration for white-collar enforcement at large. And so more so with crypto, with all of these quick changes and rapid changes in policy. And you sort of went through the list of the first 60 or so days. And yeah, there's a lot happening, but in many ways, it's still early. We don't know how investigations are going to start playing out, and how prosecutions are going to start playing out. But I think we do have some early indications. Lauren mentioned states possibly becoming interested as the SEC sort of steps back from its previous positions. So you're going to see, I think, a shift from more technical enforcement to more traditional enforcement of, traditional serious crimes. So less about pursuing crypto as crypto and more so about pursuing those more traditional crimes that are using crypto as a vehicle for wrongdoing, as Lauren mentioned. The SEC has indicated its position that many cryptocurrencies are not securities, and therefore purchasers and holders are not protected by federal securities laws. And I think this position has been on the ropes for some time now. And while DOJ is not bound by the SEC's interpretations, it's certainly going to be influenced by those interpretations and the commission's change in policy. And I think we're seeing, an abandonment of those securities fraud theories in criminal charges. And you're going to see more of the bread and butter wire fraud charges along with other traditional charges like money laundering. Wire fraud charges are fairly simple, as you probably know, Frank, a scheme to defraud and use of the wires. So any texts or emails or anything. And for example, in the district court in Northern California, they just secured a conviction against a CEO of I think it was going to be a coin issuer. And it was essentially a pump and dump scheme. And they charged wire fraud and money laundering charges against that individual. I guess what's sort of ironic about it is that to pump up the interest in the coin, the defendant marketed the coin as an anti-money laundering coin that had all of the features that made it, compliant with federal anti-money laundering rules. But it just goes to show how some of these traditional bread and butter charges can be used in the crypto space. So while the overall regulatory environment is becoming relaxed, I think enforcement priorities are going to remain focused on some of the traditional problems we've seen with crypto. With fraud last month, a hacker stole $1.4 billion in Ethereum from Bybit and laundered it on the dark web. Anti-money laundering and sanctions violations as well. 2 weeks ago, the government busted an alleged international money laundering operation linked to activities such as hacking, ransomware, terrorism, and drug trafficking. And that operation was evading authorities from multiple countries. I think another trend is, I think Lauren touched on this, is the increased focus on regulatory clarity. The regulators want to provide clear frameworks for the businesses and partner with those businesses. This was sort of previewed in, a previous podcast that you did with Commissioner Peirce, but now we're seeing it in action. And the SEC has already called for recommendations from the industry. And we're seeing the industry respond to those requests: streamlined registration, modernized custody and market rules, disclosure standards that address some of the unique risks and benefits of blockchain. And then I think finally, the regulators really want to promote innovation. And I think the enforcement priorities are going to follow that as well. I think going forward, some things I'm looking at is that, we may be in a transition period, and it's hard to tell which way this will go, because as we ease up on crypto regulation, we've come to an understanding that crypto is something different, and we are still trying to figure out how we are going to interact with it as a government, how we're going to regulate it, how we're going to conduct our enforcement and set policy. And I think during sort of this intermediate or time of change, there's an opportunity for criminals to really take advantage of that and crime to really increase in this space that we are trying to sort of build the proper framework around. I think we may also see private litigation as a check on the industry. I think this is something to look out for, possibly class action suits against fraudulent issuers as purchasers look to recoup their money. And I think maybe this is a philosophical question, maybe not necessarily legal, but as the government appears to be more friendly with the crypto industry, I'm wondering how the crypto industry will respond in terms of being able to conduct transactions without the government, sort of the government's blessing for your transaction. So I think this is just something interesting that I'm watching.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. What's striking to me, and maybe you'll agree, maybe you'll disagree, but a lot of the things that you are describing and concerned about and predicting are not dissimilar to what many sophisticated, established, multinational banks and other companies that are not crypto players, that are just traditional finance companies, have to worry about. And a lot of those companies obviously deal with a lot of these problems through robust compliance, really, strong in-house legal counsel and frameworks to mitigate some of these risks along the lines of classic fraud, money laundering, all the other things that I think you've identified. So it's just interesting to me that as the industry is allowed to potentially flourish and grow, it still has to confront some of the bread and butter things about how you deal with all the potential for risk. And that might look like having to have a whole legal department and a compliance function and training and policies and procedures around this, which, we went from 0 to 60 really fast because people prior had been worried about just, is the product viable? Will it survive regulatory scrutiny? And now you're talking about a world in which you could grow and get to the point where you have to have all these functions to ward off all the problems that could arise just in a typical high-risk environment. I don't know if that sort of jives with the way you're seeing it or not, but certainly to me, it felt a little bit like that's a funny problem to have as a crypto company, given where we were just less than a year ago.
Yeah, no, what I think is interesting is that I think we have to, I love crypto. I think crypto is an important technology, but I also sort of have come to terms with the fact that people can do bad things with crypto. It provides a unique opportunity to evade authorities. And so in this sort of period of change that we are entering, I predict, or I at least suspect, that many bad actors are going to be taking advantage of the friendliness that the current administration is, sort of extending to the industry. And we may see a rise of these crypto-related fraudulent conduct and money laundering schemes.
And if people are doing their diligence and going to industry conferences and listening to this podcast, they would hear that the administration and Commissioner Peirce and others are aggressively thinking about ways to push back on that, despite the new friendly environment, right? Because bad actors is top of mind for them, and they're trying to design the rules in a way that obviously bloods some of that. So it's interesting how it seems to all be coming together in a way that I think is both allows the best parts to grow and the worst parts to hopefully be pared back and regulated, or at least not to ruin the whole thing for everyone, right?
That's the hope.
All right. Well, I think our CryptoCounsel Council first meeting has been a smash success. I'm really happy to have you guys and have you join both in various configurations and with guests that will be coming on the podcast for the rest of the season. So hopefully, Josh, if you're out there listening from your very austere government office, you have been pleased with the new direction that we've gone in. But we are very excited as CryptoCounsel 2.0 to be decoding the most important issues in this crypto space. So appreciate you guys joining and look forward to talking with one or both of you and guests from industry and government and other parts of the crypto space soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Frank. It's been wonderful to be on. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Frank.